Vivid verses.
I was standing in the break room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I'd been distracted by a chart I couldn't quite make sense of, and when I saw the clinic's number on my screen, I assumed it was a billing matter. Mr. Hadley, this is Dr. Whitcomb. Do you have a moment? I set the coffee down. There was something in his tone, careful, deliberate, the cadence of a man choosing his words before speaking them, that made me close the break room door and lean against the counter. I have a moment. Is everything all right? Probably, he said. I want to flag something to you. We received a records request this morning, submitted on your behalf by someone using a healthcare proxy authorization. Before we process it, I wanted to verify with you directly that you're aware of the request and have authorized it. A records request. I'll let the phrase settle. The proxy I had given Camille 3 months ago, after the cardiac scare, had been a quiet matter. We'd signed it at the kitchen table. I had thanked her and meant it. What records were requested? The complete file. Cardiology workup, family history, everything from the past 18 months. The request specified physical copies, mailed to your home address. I watch a colleague pass by in the hallway, raise a hand in greeting, keep walking. I return the wave on autopilot. Dr. Whitcomb, I appreciate you calling. I did not authorize this request. There was a pause on his end. Not surprise, exactly. More the practiced silence of a man who had made these calls before and knew that his patient on the other end was now performing rapid reorganization of his understanding. I see. I wanted to be sure. The proxy on file is for emergencies and care decisions, but a full records pull, particularly with the specifics requested, struck our intake clerk as something we should verify. We've had some experiences. I appreciated that he did not elaborate. You did the right thing. Please don't process the request. I'll be revoking the proxy tomorrow morning, and I'll send you something in writing this evening to confirm that the authorization is no longer valid. Of course. And Mr. Hadley, if there's anything else, anything at all you'd like to discuss, please feel free to call. I told him I would, and we ended the call. I stood for a moment in the break room with my hand still on the phone. The coffee on the counter was now profoundly cold. I poured into the sink and rinsed the cup and walked back to my desk. For the rest of the afternoon, I did the work in front of me. There was a model that needed cleaning up before end of day, a colleague who had questions about a client deliverable, a sequence of small obligations that asked nothing of my emotional state and offered, in their asking, a kind of refuge. I let the call sit at the back of my mind like a stone at the bottom of a pond. I would dive for it later. Right now, what I needed was time, not to feel, but to think. Why the records? That was the first question, and the most important. The proxy itself was a tool. It granted Camille standing to make decisions if I were incapacitated. It did not, in any normal interpretation, contemplate her quietly requesting my full medical file to be mailed to our house, where I would presumably never see the envelope before she'd opened and read it. It was a strange use of the document, and strange uses of documents tend to indicate strange purposes. I drove home the long way that evening. Not because I was avoiding her, I had no intention of saying anything that night, but because I wanted the additional 20 minutes to think clearly before I walked through the door and had to be a person rather than an analyst. Possibility 1. She meant well and was being clumsy. Perhaps a friend had recommended she keep her own copies of my records in case of another emergency. Perhaps she had not understood that this required my consent independent of the proxy. This was possible. It was also, I noted as I worked through it, the kind of explanation that depended on charitable readings of small actions, and small actions in marriages, I had come to believe, were rarely small. Possibility 2. She wanted information I had not given her. The cardiac event had been frightening. I had been honest with her about what the doctors found and what they recommended. I had not, however, walked her through every line of every report. I had spared her some of the more granular language about prognosis percentages because I judged that the headline numbers were what mattered and the rest would only generate worry. If she had felt, rightly or wrongly, that I was managing what she heard, then perhaps she had decided to read it herself. This was a more sympathetic version of possibility 2, and I held in my mind for several minutes as I drove. It was the version I wanted to be true. But sitting with it, I noticed something. If she had wanted to read my records, she could have asked me. I would have given them to her. I would have sat with her at the kitchen table and walked her through every line. The fact that she had not asked and had instead used the proxy quietly suggested that she had reasons for wanting the information that did not include me as a participant in her reading of it. Possibility 3. The information was for someone else. I turned off the main road onto our street. The houses on either side had their lights on, the early autumn dark settling in faster than I'd quite gotten used to. I slowed for our driveway and pulled in and sat with the engine off for a moment longer. I did not know, yet, which possibility was correct. What I knew was that the call from Dr. Whitcomb was data, and the data was uncomfortable, and the right response to uncomfortable data was not to interpret prematurely. I would sit with it. I would watch. I would, for the moment, behave exactly as a husband who had not received a strange phone call would behave. She was in the kitchen when I came in, and she turned and smiled at me with the unguarded warmth she'd had when I first met her, the warmth that had been one of the reasons I'd married her, and I kissed her on the temple and asked her about her day, and she told me, and I listened, and I poured a glass of water at the sink and watched the dark backyard through the window, and thought, I will not say anything tonight. I will not say anything until I understand more. That evening, after she'd gone up to read in bed, I sat in my study with the door cracked and drafted a letter to Dr. Whitcomb confirming, in writing, that the records request was unauthorized and that I would be revoking the proxy in the morning. I did not send it yet. I wanted to think about timing. The thing about a confrontation is that the moment you have it, the other person is on notice, and from that moment forward, every behavior you observe is a behavior calibrated to the awareness of being observed. You lose the ability to see what they did when they thought no one was watching. So if there was more to learn, if the records request was not the whole story, but only the piece of it I had stumbled into, then the worst possible move was to confront her now and seal off all further information. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark study and allowed myself, for the first time since the call, to feel what I felt. It was not anger. I had, somewhere along the way, stopped being a person who reacted to betrayals with anger. Anger requires a kind of surprise, and I had learned that when you are surprised by people you should not have been, the lesson is about your own reading of them, not their character. What I felt was something closer to grief, but a quiet and well-organized grief, the kind that knows it has work to do. I went to bed beside her and lay there and listened to her breathing and did not sleep for a long time. The next morning, I drove to the clinic before work and signed a revocation in person. Dr. Whitcomb's office had me on the calendar. He had, I gathered, expected me. The administrator who handled the paperwork was professional and discreet. She did not ask me why. I was grateful for that. I signed a revocation and asked for a copy and asked her also to flag my file so that no further proxies could be added without an in-person verification from me. And she made a note, and I left, and I drove to work, and I worked. That evening at dinner, I asked Camille about her week. It's been all right, she said. Quiet. Did anything come in the mail today? Just bills. She did not look up from her plate. Why? No reason. I'm expecting something for the car. Oh, no, nothing like that yet. I watched her eat. She was a graceful eater, neat with her hands, and there was a particular way she would look up between bites and meet my eyes that I had once found enchanting. She did so now and smiled at me, and I smiled back. How was your day? She asked. Long. There's a presentation Friday. I'm trying to pull together. Oh, the one you mentioned? That one. You'll be great. You always are. I thanked her and asked if she wanted more wine. She did. I poured. She does not know I know. The thought ran underneath the conversation like a current under a calm surface. The records had not arrived, and she was waiting on them, and she was performing, for me, the role of a wife who had nothing unusual on her mind. The performance was good. It was, in fact, indistinguishable from sincerity, which was its own kind of useful information. I do not believe that everyone who behaves badly is a calculating villain. I believe that most people who do calculating things have rationalized them in advance into something that does not feel calculating to them. They feel, instead, like a person doing a difficult but reasonable thing, and the feeling of reasonableness becomes, in their telling of it to themselves, a kind of innocence. I was watching that innocence right now, and I did not feel contempt for it. I felt, more than anything, a clinical curiosity about how far it extended. After dinner, I helped clear the plates, and we sat on the back patio with our wine. And she told me about a book she was reading, and I asked questions about it. And the questions I asked were genuine because I was, in fact, interested in the book, and the conversation was lovely. The fall air was cool. The yard smelled of damp leaves. She put her feet up on the chair beside hers and leaned her head back and looked at the sky. And I looked at her, and I thought about how strange it is to look at someone you love and recognize with the steady part of your mind that you're also simultaneously gathering evidence. I love this time of year, she said. So do you? She laughed. So do I. What kind of agreement is that? It's the agreement of a tired man. I leaned over and kissed her hand. I love it too. We sat there a while longer. Eventually we went inside, and eventually we went to bed, and I lay awake again and again for a long time. The peace that turned the matter from a single breach into a pattern arrived 8 days later, and it arrived from a direction I had not been watching. I had lunch on a Thursday with Owen, an old friend from before the marriage, a man who had known both of us individually and then together, and who had, over the years, settled into a steady, low-volume friendship with both of us, neither closer to me nor to her, but warmly available to either. He was not someone Camille and I discussed. Exactly. He was simply present in our lives, as some people are. He invited me out for lunch with the framing of "it's been a while," which I took at face value, and we met at a small place near his office and ordered sandwiches. "How's Camille?" he asked after we'd settled. "She's well. Busy. And you?" "Recovered from everything. Mostly. Doing the cardiac rehab. Eating better. Boring stuff. Glad to hear it." He paused, and the pause was a fraction longer than it should have been, and I felt, before he spoke again, the small click of a piece sliding into a slot somewhere I hadn't been watching. "I have to ask you about something. It might be nothing, but it's been on my mind, and I think you'd want to know." "Go on." "I had dinner at her parents' a couple of weeks ago. Her mother invited a few of us over. It was a nice evening, but there was, I don't know how to put this, there was a long stretch of conversation about your health, about specifics, the numbers from your tests, the medication you're on, what your prognosis is. It was not the way you talk about a person's health when you're worried about them. It was more like a briefing." I set my sandwich down. I had not yet taken a bite. Who was at the dinner? Her parents, her sister and brother-in-law, a cousin of hers I'd met once before, and Camille, and the conversation about my health. How did it start? Her mother brought it up, asked Camille how things were. And Camille, she had a lot of detail. She had the kind of detail that, frankly, I didn't think you'd be sharing. The cousin asked some pointed questions, and Camille answered them. There was a moment where her father said something like, "Well, it's good you finally know what we're dealing with," and the way he said it, I don't know. It struck me. I sat with it for a few days, and I kept coming back to it. And I decided I'd rather tell you, and have you say it's fine. I've been keeping them informed than not tell you, and find out later it wasn't fine. I looked at him. He was a careful man, Owen, a man who did not bring information forward lightly and who had clearly turned this particular bit of information over many times before deciding to surface it. "Thank you," I said. "Was it fine?" I did not answer immediately. I was thinking about the phrase, what we're dealing with. I was thinking about finally. I was thinking about a family dinner at which my body, its electrical irregularities, its medication regimen, its statistical futures, had been laid out for the inspection of in-laws and a cousin I had met perhaps 3 times and had been laid out by the person to whom I had given the legal authority to act on my behalf in the event that I could not act for myself. "It was not fine," I said, "but you were right to tell me, and I would appreciate it if you didn't mention to her or to anyone else that we had this conversation." "Of course. How long had this been going on, do you think?" "The briefings." He thought about it. "I can't say for certain, but the way her father said finally, I had the sense it was not the first such conversation. It was more like the most detailed one to date." "Right." We finished lunch. We talked about other things. He was a good friend, and he understood, I think, that what he had given me was more than he could see the shape of, and he did not press. I thanked him again when we parted. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time before I started the engine. The Proxy was not the breach. The Proxy was the latest delivery mechanism for a longer-running process. The records request had failed because Dr. Whitcomb had been alert. But if it had succeeded, the records would have arrived, and the records would have been read, and the contents of the records would have been, at the next family dinner or the one after, distributed. My private medical information was, and had been for some time, currency in a household I was not present in. The cardiac scare had not been the beginning of the briefings. It had only been the most recent material added to a file I had not known was being kept. I noticed, sitting in the car, that I was very calm. I had expected, when I'd allowed myself, over the past week, to think about what I might learn, to feel something dramatic. Instead, I felt the quietness of a problem fully understood. The scope was now clear. The actor was now clear. The pattern was now clear. The only remaining question was what I would do about it. And even that question was not as open as it would have been a week ago, because over the past 8 days I had been doing, in the back of my mind, the work of preparing for a number of possible answers, and one of those answers was now the right one. I started the car and drove back to work and finished my afternoon. That evening I came home, and Camille was on the couch with a book, and I asked her how her day had been. And she told me, and I told her about mine, and we ate dinner together, and after dinner we watched something on television, and at no point did I indicate to her that anything had changed. I went to bed when she did. I slept when I slept beside her. I had decided, by then, what I was going to do. The decision had taken me about 30 seconds, somewhere between the parking lot and the highway. The execution of the decision required more time, because there were small things that needed to be in place first, and a man who acts decisively is not the same as a man who acts hastily. Decisive meant that once I knew what the right action was, I did not waver. It did not mean that I skipped the preparation that good action required. Over the next 2 days, I did the following. I made an appointment with a lawyer, not our lawyer who had drafted the Proxy in the first place, but a different one, recommended by someone whose judgment I trusted. I met with her on a Friday morning, briefly, and walked through the situation. She listened without expression and at the end said that what I described was unfortunately familiar to her, and that the steps I was contemplating were sensible, and that she would prepare what I needed and have it ready within a week. I asked her also to prepare materials for a longer conversation we might or might not have a later date. She nodded. I moved the small number of personal items I cared about, a few documents, a watch that had been my grandfather's, a folder of photographs from before the marriage, out of the house and into a deposit box. I did this on a lunch break, quietly, without ceremony. I packed a gym bag. I had been packing gym bags for years, 3 or 4 times a week, and a packed gym bag in the back of my closet would not register as anything to anyone who happened to glance at it. This particular gym bag contained, in addition to the usual items, enough clothing and toiletries to get me through several days without returning to the house. I did all of this in the quiet hours around the edges of an ordinary working week. I made no announcements. I gave Camille no reason to suspect that anything was different. I continued to be at dinner, on the patio, in the small exchanges of a shared household. The man I had been, because the man I had been was still, in fact, who I was. What had changed was not me, but my information about her, and I saw no reason to perform that change in advance of acting on it. The night before, I lay awake in bed for a while listening to her breathing. She slept easily, and she always had, and there had been many nights over the years when I had taken comfort in the rhythm of her sleep beside me. I tried, for a few minutes, to feel something dramatic. I tried to feel betrayed in a way that was sharp enough to call up grief. What I felt instead was the steady quiet of a man who has made his decision and is no longer in the part of the process that admits of feeling. She offered me a version of herself that I loved. She has now revealed a version of herself that I cannot live with. I have spent a week confirming that the second version is real, and another 2 days arranging the practical conditions of leaving. There is nothing left to learn. The only remaining task is the conversation, and the conversation does not need to be long. I slept for about 4 hours and got up before she did and made coffee. I told her that morning that we would talk in the evening. I said it casually, over coffee, the way you mention any small piece of upcoming household business. She looked up from her phone. Talk about what? Something I want to discuss when we both have the evening to focus on it. Not now. Tonight. Are you all right? I'm fine. It's nothing urgent, but it's something I want to give attention to, and I'd rather not start on a Tuesday morning. She studied my face for a moment. I knew, giving her the gift of a long day in which to anticipate the conversation, and she would spend the day running through possibilities, and some of those possibilities, given what she had been doing, would be uncomfortable. I did not feel cruel about this. I felt that a person who had been managing information about my body for the consumption of her family had earned a few hours of low-grade dread, and that was the price of the warning. All right, she said. I love you, I said. I did not say it as a deception. I said it because it was true in the complicated way that such things continue to be true even when they are about to stop being operative. I went to work. I worked through my day. I did not, that day, allow myself any further reflection on what was coming, because reflection at this point was unproductive. I had thought everything I needed to think, and rehearsing it further would only soften something that did not need to be softened. I drove home at the usual hour. I stopped on the way to fill the gas tank. I checked, in the parking lot at the gas station, that the gym bag was still in the back of my car where I had put it that morning before leaving the house. Camille had cooked. The house smelled of something with rosemary in it, and there were 2 glasses on the counter, and she had lit a candle on the table. A small ordinary candle, the kind we sometimes lit at dinner, but also I noticed the kind of small ordinary candle that a person might light when they were trying to set a mood that suggested intimacy and ease. She came around the counter and kissed me when I walked in. Hi, she said. Hi. Why? Half a glass. She poured. We sat. We ate. The food was excellent. She was a fine cook and had always been, and she had picked, I noticed, a meal I particularly liked. The candle burned. She kept the conversation light. She asked about the presentation I had given the previous week. She told me about a friend's new dog. She refilled my glass without my asking. I did not stop her because I was not going to drink it. I let her finish. I had decided in advance that I would not interrupt her dinner, that I would not cut short the meal she had cooked, that I would give her the meal in its entirety because the meal was whatever else it was, an act of her labor, and I was not going to leave a plate of her cooking half-eaten on the table on my way out the door. There was a kind of respect in eating her food that the situation could afford. When the plates were clear, she rose to get something from the kitchen, and I said, "Sit down a minute. Let's have a conversation now." She sat back down. She did not ask what conversation. She had been waiting for it. On Tuesday 2 weeks ago, I said, "Dr. Whitcomb called me at work. He wanted to verify a request for my full medical records that had been submitted under the proxy I gave you in the spring. The request asked for hard copies to be mailed to the house. I told him I had not authorized the request. The next morning, I went to the clinic and revoked the proxy in writing. She did not move. The candle flickered. Her face was very still. I considered for several days what the request meant. I considered the most charitable explanations, and I held those carefully because you and I have been together a long time and you have earned a careful reading. I did not say anything to you because I wanted to understand the shape of what had happened before I acted on it. I paused, not for effect, but because I wanted to give her here the chance to speak first if she chose to. She did not. Her hands were in her lap. Then last Thursday, I had lunch with Owen. He told me, with some hesitation, about a dinner at your parents' house, a dinner at which my health was discussed in considerable detail. Specifics from my workup, medications, prognosis. He told me your father said something to the effect that it was good you all finally knew what was being dealt with. He told me the conversation did not have the shape of family concern. It had the shape of a briefing. Her eyes moved then, not to mine, to a point somewhere on the table between us. I watched her face carefully. There was no flush of indignation, no widening into shock. There was the particular stillness of a person watching a thing they had hoped would not happen, happening. I want to be clear about what I'm saying, I said. I'm not saying that my health is a secret. It is not. I would have shared whatever you wanted to know with you, and I have been sharing what I thought was useful, and if you had wanted more, you could have asked and I would have given it. What I am saying is that you took the proxy I gave you, which I gave you from a real and specific place, after a frightening experience, because I wanted the person I trusted most with my body to have standing to act on its behalf, and you used it to try to extract information you intended to circulate. And the circulation is not a hypothetical I am inferring. It has already been happening. The proxy was not the first instance. It was the next instance in a pattern I did not know existed. It wasn't, she said. And then she stopped because she was, I think, an honest enough person to recognize, in real time, that any sentence beginning with "it wasn't" was going to require her to say something untrue, and she was not yet ready to say something untrue. She started again. I was worried about you. They were worried about me. I understand that. They have a right to know. They love you. They have whatever right I give them, and I had not given them this. That was my call to make. You took it from me. I didn't think of it that way. I believe you. I think you genuinely did not think of it that way. I think you told yourself a story in which what you were doing was caretaking and concern and family closeness, and the story was comfortable enough that you did not have to look directly at the parts of it that would not have stood up to scrutiny. I think when you submitted the records request, you told yourself you were being a good wife and that I would understand, and that there was no need to ask me first, because asking me first would have introduced friction and you wanted the records cleanly. I think you did not anticipate that the clinic would call me. I think the clinic calling me was, from your point of view, the bad luck of an unusually careful doctor. I do not believe you are a calculating person, Camille. I believe you are a person who has been making for some time a series of small choices that you have been telling yourself were not the choices they were. She was crying now, but quietly, the tears moving without sound. I noted them. I did not move toward her. I did not move away from her. I sat where I was. I don't, she said. I'm sorry. I am sorry. I know. What do you want me to do? I considered the question. It was, I noticed, the wrong question. Not what should we do? Not can we work on this, but what do you want me to do? Which placed her in a posture of compliance and me in a posture of judgment, and which was, I suspected, an attempt to slot us into a familiar dynamic of penance and forgiveness in which her family would have over the years, given her plenty of practice on both sides. I don't want you to do anything, I said. I'm not asking for anything from you. I came home tonight to tell you what I had learned and what I had concluded. I revoked the proxy 2 weeks ago. I have spent the last week and a half watching to see whether what Owen described was an isolated incident or a pattern, and I have satisfied myself that it is a pattern. The records request was not a mistake. It was a method, and the method has told me everything I need to know about how my private information is treated in this marriage, and by extension, how I am treated. Please, I'm going to leave tonight. I have a bag in the car. I'll be staying somewhere else for a while. You'll hear from a lawyer in the next several days. Nothing about that process needs to be hostile. I'm not interested in hostility. I am interested in being clear. Please, can we just talk about this? Can we sit with it for a few days? We have been sitting with it. I have been sitting with it. You have been sitting with it for the last several hours since I told you this morning that we would talk tonight, and probably for some part of the last 2 weeks since you noticed that the records did not arrive. I have already made the decision. I am telling you the decision because you're entitled to be told, not because the decision is open to revision. It's open to revision because I'm your wife and you love me and we have a life. We have a life that you have been narrating in pieces to your family without my consent. That changes what the life is. I'm not going to argue the facts with you because the facts are not in dispute, and I am not going to argue the conclusions with you because the conclusions are mine to draw. She put her face in her hands. The candle was still burning. I noticed, distantly, that the wick had grown long and was throwing off small fragments of black at the edges of the flame. I never wanted to hurt you, she said. I know that too. I want you to hear something, Camille, and I want you to take it with you when I'm gone, because I'm not going to repeat it and I want it to be useful to you. I am not angry. I am not bitter. I do not think you are a monster, and I'm not going to talk about you that way to anyone. What I am is unwilling to be married to a person who treats my body and its medical history as material to be passed around a dinner table. That is a small, specific thing. It is not a referendum on your soul. It is a decision about what I will and will not live with, and I have made it. I stood up. I reached over, took the candle, and pinched out the wick between my thumb and forefinger. I put it back on the table. The food was excellent, I said. Thank you for cooking. She looked up at me. Her face was wet. I did not feel cruel, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt the particular quiet of a man who had, for the better part of 2 weeks, been preparing for a moment and was now in a moment and would, in a few minutes, be on the other side of it. I'll be in touch about the practical things, I said. Take care of yourself. I walked to the front hall. My keys were on the table where I had put them when I came in. I picked them up. I put on my jacket. I opened the door. I heard her voice behind me. Not loud, not pleading exactly, but the ragged shape of a sentence trying to begin. I did not turn around. I closed the door behind me with a quiet, ordinary click. The same click it had made every evening for years when I came home and was glad to be home. And I walked to my car where my gym bag was waiting in the back seat, and I started the engine and I pulled out of the driveway and I drove. A man who already knows the ending has very little reason to extend the final scene. I had learned, somewhere in the long weeks of watching and not speaking, that the only kind of conversation worth having about a thing like this is the conversation that ends it, and the only kind of leaving worth doing is the kind that is already done by the time you stand up from the table. The rest, the lawyer, the logistics, the slow administrative work of disentangling a life, would take its time. It would happen in offices and on phone calls and over signatures on documents that would feel at every stage smaller than the marriage they were ending. But the marriage had ended in the kitchen when I named what she had done, and she did not deny it. Everything from here was paperwork. I drove for about 20 minutes before I realized I had not turned on a radio. I did not turn it on. The quiet was useful. I would get to where I was going, and I would put the bag in a room, and I would call the friend who had offered me his guest room when I told him, vaguely, that I might need it, and I would thank him. I would sleep, and tomorrow I would go to work, and the day after I would call the lawyer, and the work of the next stage would begin. But for now, for the length of the drive, what I had was the road and the dark and the steady, unsurprised understanding that I had done the right thing, in the right order at the right pace, and that the part of my life in which I had been a man who did not yet know was over, and the part in which I was a man who knew and had acted accordingly.
Thanks for listening.